Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we're working on the E-Series again. We finally got it running, which is great, but you can see that there's, no radiator, nothing here. So I just have these braces installed. I put the bottom one in because we just had this whole front corner replaced. So I wanted to make sure that we had alignment proper from left to right and get this bottom piece in and make sure that this top piece would fit in here. And it's kind of just here. So we'll be taking that back off to do everything else. But I put them back in to make sure that we had proper alignment with the body here. So with that being said, before I start putting a lot more stuff back in here, we wanted to test the cooling system. So this is something that you can do on any vehicle that has a cooling system, which is pretty much every one of them. So what we have here, we have a couple plugs. These are silicone plugs. These are made for like powder coating. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna plug all of the coolant lines. Now, why are we plugging the coolant lines? So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to vacuum test the cooling system. Now there's multiple products that you can buy for vacuum refilling. All right, so the one thing that I have here, and it's one of the more expensive ones, and the reason I bought it is I like its construction. So I'll show that to you here in a second, but you can buy these silicone plugs anywhere. A lot of powder coating places have them that supply powder coating supplies. You get them on the internet, anything like that. So you can buy them in big packs. So you can buy them in a pack like this. Now the problem with these packs is, this was the one that I found that covered the most range, but it only goes up to 1 inch. So these are the 1 inch ones, these gray ones here. All right, so there's stuff in here that goes down to a 1/16 of an inch. Realistically, I'm never gonna use them. So I bought these to do cooling system stuff. And if I was gonna be doing any painting or something, I wanted to plug some bolt holes, you can use these for that as well. So in order to get big enough silicone plugs, you have to buy them individually. So this comes in a pack of 5 for these green ones. Now these green ones are number 10 and they are 2 inches. So they are 2 inches around, which is what I needed to plug these radiator hoses. So essentially what we do here is you take your plug and put it in the hose. Now, if you're worried about it sucking in, you can put the clamp back on the end of the hose here. So we'll put this guy in here and it will not pull in then. So we used a 1 inch for this hose here. This is our coolant bottle feed. And then we have the vent here from the intake manifold. So we plugged it. So this plug is large enough that it actually won't go into the hose anymore. And then we have another plug here for the lower coolant hose. So that guy goes down here and just gets fit in there. So we have all of these plugged here, all right? So the idea is we want to plug all of the ports that go to the degas bottle or overflow bottle, whichever you have. Any vents, say from your radiator or whatever, because obviously we don't have a radiator. And then also your coolant hoses. So your upper radiator hose, your lower radiator hose. So the next thing you have to do is you got to figure out how you're going to install vacuum into this system. All right, so that's where your tool comes in handy. So grab that vacuum refiller. I'll bring it over here and I'll show it to you and how we're gonna actually test this system. So this works really well because what it does is it pulls a vacuum on the system and basically tells you if you have any leaks. So the one I have is obviously made by Snap-on, and the reason I wanted the Snap-on one is because of its construction. So I'm gonna open this thing up and show you what we have to work with and why I chose this over probably a dozen other options. So the Snap-on one I like because it's all metal. Probably 75 to 90% of the vacuum refillers that are out there are plastic bodied. and not crazy about plastic, especially whenever you're trying to pull a hard vacuum or an elongated period of time running a vacuum, or you're running high air pressure through this. All right. So I chose this because I liked its construction. The gauge is easy to read. I like this. It gives you the air tool adapter here. So basically what this does, it clips into the side here with a quick disconnect, and you put your shop air to the one side. Now we have another hose here. This is your refiller side, which we won't be using today. So the other end of this hose here goes where the valve is here, and this valve basically turns on your coolant flow. So you can pull your vacuum and then open this valve, and then it will pull coolant from your container and put it into the engine. So, but basically what we're doing today is we're gonna check for leaks using this. We're not gonna be refilling the system. So this has a dual purpose here. Now, the other end of this, you have a thumb wheel, so to speak, here. So this will spin and it will compress or expand this plug to fit into a bottle or a hose or anything like that. Now they give you the adapters for these as well. So this doesn't quite fit into this hose here. It's a little bit too big, and they make adapters that go bigger than this, but they also make a cone adapter. So we'll be using the cone adapter today, and we're going to use it in the upper radiator hose here. So we won't be using that plug. So we'll be doing all of our pressure testing through this upper radiator hose. So I'm going to get this thing set up for you here and give you a little bit better view of it and show you how it works. So we have our cone adapter here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this on the actual fitting here. All right. And then this guy will go inside the radiator hose. Now it's a pretty tight fit, which is, what we want here. So now we have to hook up our shop air. So this is an exhaust. So this hose here can just fall down to the ground. Air will come out of there. If you choose to use hearing protection with this, that's up to you. It's not super loud, but it can be depending on, how often you're into it here. So we have our tool installed here. We're gonna wind our thumb wheel in a little bit there to give it a little bit of an expansion to help it hold into this hose really well. And then we're gonna leave our valve open over here for now. So we're gonna hook up our air supply here. And you notice that we have air to this, but we're not getting air through it here. So there is a button on here. And you can see that when we press this button, we get the hose moving, and then it gives pressure in. So we're gonna get airflow going through here and then close this valve. So we're sitting at about maybe 15.5 inches of vacuum here. And if you watch this needle, you can see it's moving a little bit here. So basically what it's doing is it has collapsed all of the radiator hoses, and it's working on trying to collapse these smaller hoses. So as you move these hoses and they start to try to collapse, because I'm actually squeezing the smaller one over here, you can see that the gauge is going down a little bit. So basically what it's doing is it's pulling a vacuum on the hoses pretty heavy. And as these hoses start to collapse slowly because they're trying not to collapse, you're losing a little bit of vacuum here. So we're gonna just keep putting a little bit more vacuum to this. And once it stabilizes, you can actually leave it there and let it hold that vacuum for a while. So it's still slowly dropping down there. But what you can do now is listen for leaks. And you can see this upper radiator hose here is pretty well compressed here. And that's what this does. So it's compressing all of the hoses. So these hoses can only endure so much pressure before they start to really collapse even more. So this hose that's over here, I can squeeze it and it kind of wants to stay together. But as you squeeze these hoses, you're going to start losing more and more vacuum because it's taking up that space and removing that vacuum. But what you can do now is you can listen for leaks. So I didn't have this hose clamp on earlier and it was leaking out of this hose clamp. So you could hear it just slowly. So now what you can do is you can watch your vacuum gauge here and make sure that it's going to hold vacuum. So we're going to pump this up some more. So you can see we went way up there and it's slowly falling there. So basically what it's trying to do is it's trying to pull vacuum on the whole system here. And if this gauge falls quickly, you have a major leak somewhere that needs to be inspected. So basically what we're going to do now is we're going to go all over this van, all over these cooling lines and see if we have any leaks. But doing so requires a quiet shop so that you can listen for this leak. Now, it's going to continuously drop vacuum because it's continuously sucking these hoses down. Now you can see that this hose was not sucked down this much previously, but it has sucked it down even more now. And our silicone plugs are doing their jobs here to keep any air from coming into those. So I'll give you a little bit of a demonstration here if I can get it to do it, but you'll be able to watch these hoses re-expand once you open this. So what this does is it's supposed to pull coolant in through this hose because it'll be in obviously the coolant bottle. However, since we're just venting to atmosphere, it will just release the vacuum here. So I'm going to walk around this van and make sure we don't have any of these coolant leaks anywhere. So we'll pump the vacuum back up and see if we have any hissing or anything unusual going on here, because this is still dropping. It should technically be holding, but we also have nothing in the system, and we're going to double check and make sure that we have no issues. So hopefully we don't hear anything, and that's basically what we're going to be doing. Okay, so we're not quite holding a good vacuum here. So cooling systems aren't designed for holding vacuum, so no surprise, but it should at least hold something here. It's slowly been going down. It's been off for a couple minutes now. So we're going to release the pressure. And we're going to pull this refiller tool out of here, and we're going to install the coolant bottle. And I think what we're going to end up doing is putting a plug back in here, put the clamp on it, and we're going to pressurize the system this time. So this is our next step. So we're going to pressurize the system and see if it holds pressure. So we know it's kind of holding vacuum, it's pulling vacuum pretty good, but we're going to see if it's going to hold pressure now. Now, these are all parts of testing your cooling system, so you know, this can get pretty involved, and I want to make sure that this cooling system is 100% perfect before I start putting everything back together, because if I have to pull this thing apart again for something stupid, it's going to be a nightmare. So we're going to get this thing off of here. And just like that comes out, and we'll put our plug in here. So we got our hose clamp. We're going to put our plug in here and then attach the hose clamp. Now, since we're going to be using the coolant bottle, we're going to pull this plug out of here and put our coolant bottle on here. So coolant bottle, put the clamp back on. And then we have this guy here. Pull the plug out of it. It goes to the vents here. So we'll put that on there. Now we have one extra hose here. Actually, we should probably put this on the back side here. Be a lot easier. So we have one port here that's supposed to go to the radiator. So we're going to put the hose on here, and then we're also going to plug that hose. So we have our hose here. Put that guy on there. Take our plug, put in the end of the hose here, and put the clamp on. All right, so now this whole cooling system is sealed up. The only thing we're obviously not having here is the radiator. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna get a cooling pressure tester, stick it in this bottle, and pressurize the system and see if it holds. So we have our pressure kit here. So we're just gonna screw onto this bottle, attach our connect to this. There we go. And we're gonna put about, what's the cap say? 16 PSI. So this might take a little bit since we don't have any actual water in this system. So we're just gonna be pumping here for a while. So we were pumping and I heard a leak. So stopped pumping because it's hard to check leaks when you're trying to run the pump. And I stuck a piece of 1/4-inch hose on our cap here and ran it over to a blowgun that I use for stuff like this and put pressure to it. So I have a regulator on this. It's at about 10 pounds. Took our piece of wire here, slid it over the handle. All right, so what that does is it gives us constant 10 PSI into the bottle here. So I don't know if you can hear this leak over here, but I did end up finding it. Now, what sucks is where it's at, which is why we stopped while we were here, so we could do this whole cooling system. Now, I probably could have done this without putting the body on. However, the leak, didn't see that coming. So I'm going to show you where we're getting this leak at here. We have some soapy water if we need it. However, I'm going to show you the leak here, and the vacuum test really showed us because we weren't holding a vacuum. So it's like, okay, well, if we're not holding vacuum, then we're probably not going to hold pressure. So went ahead and we're going to check the pressure. So let's show you where I found this leak. So we're inside the van here. I don't know how well you can hear this, so we'll see if we can get the microphone over there. So you can hear this leak, I'm sure now. So, started to poke around in here. So we definitely have a leak on our J-tube thing here. So what sucks is I'm gonna have to pull this turbo back out to get to this, which, yeah, kind of sucks. I'm going to have to buy a new install kit, probably, because we're going to have to change out the O-ring for the drain there, but that should be about it. We have the top bolt there for the oil feed and some little stuff here and there. So what we're probably going to end up doing is wheeling this thing back outside and picking the body up a little bit and seeing if we can get to that. So we don't have a whole lot of stuff attached to the body here, but we'll see what comes about this. We might just be able to wrench this turbo out of here and get this coolant leak fixed. So we found our coolant leak here, so we're just going to go ahead and disconnect the gun here, and we'll get this all torn apart. But we have a couple options. A lot of the stuff that we put on here isn't excessively installed. We have like a couple plugs for the computer and the FICM and stuff like that. Nothing major. A couple hoses. I could probably pick this body back up here within an hour's worth of messing around. But I got to sit down and figure out what we're doing here. Now, the issue at hand is, which way do we really want to go here? Do we pick the body back up, or do we pull the turbo out, or do we just say, hey, let's wheel it outside, we'll pick the body up just a little bit, enough to give us enough room to work in there without having to fight everything. That's something that we can do because we can work through the dog box in the body. So that's an option we have. Because you're going to have to pull the turbo to get to that hose, and I don't know what else is in the way. So we're going to have to get some new pieces and parts here. We might be able to reuse the turbo O-ring drain. It's new. It's not been in there for a long time. It's only been in there for, I don't know how long it's been together, whatever. But, that O-ring is not expensive, and my light's dying. So, we got to figure out what we're going to do here, and we'll get that coolant leak taken care of. So, going to get a game plan here, get all this disconnected, and figure out what our best plan of attack is. So, going to get a game plan and show you what ended up leaking, and figure out how we're going to fix it here, and then recheck this system. Okay, so we did narrow down that leak. We did finally get to it. And here the problem was the O-Dawg intake. So depending on what kind of EGR you have, your gasket may not seal up against the bottom of the intake because of bulkiness. Now, I'm not gonna really show you what we got going on here, but back here, it was the O-ring fitting that came out of the bottom of the intake. So I have the other intake here, so I can show that to you, but basically we had to rework that and put it back in. And doing that involved us pulling the turbo out and the downpipe and the up pipes, which, there's not a whole lot of room back there to do that. So we ended up getting that done, and we are going to pressure test this again. So we have our coolant pressure tester here, and then we have our air hose here that I'm going to use to pump up this system, because it sucks trying to build pressure through the whole system with this little pump. You'll be here for half an hour pumping that thing. So we're going to pressure test this, and then I'll show you what we had going on with our intake there, and hopefully we don't have any more leaks. We did pressure test this a little bit and found a bad hose clamp. So little stuff like that will really make yourself hate yourself for not replacing things, or something stupid like a hose clamp. So we're going to pressure test this one more time and see if it holds up, because we only got a little bit of pressure on it before we found the hose clamp that was bad, and that was the upper radiator hose here clamped down on the thermostat. So we ended up changing that clamp out, and we're going to recheck this finally, and hopefully it's good. So we're going to put some air to this and see what it does. So we're sitting right before 16 there, right between 15 and 16. It's a little hard to see, but we're a hair over 15 there. So the, well, let's see if we can get this to stay here again. There we go. Okay, so we aren't losing any pressure right now, which is what we want to see. We don't want to see any pressure drop. So we're holding pressure right now. I don't hear anything hissing or whistling or anything like that. So that's a good thing. So we are holding pressure here and it is not moving at all, which is exactly what we want to see here. So you can see we are not moving on that needle at all. So we have pressure on there, and the hose clamp that we had to change was this guy right here. So we had the original spring clamp on there, and once we got up to about 6 pounds or 7 pounds of pressure, you could hear it kind of whistling around that clamp. So we ended up pulling that hose off of there and changing that clamp out. Now we just have our blow gun here. This is our testing gun here, and then we just kind of connected it to the overflow hose here and just gave it something to put pressure on. So the only reason we did it this way is so I could monitor the pressure, so we didn't over pressurize, because this is a 16 psi system, so it's not meant to be over 16 psi. And we hear nothing inside this engine, no noises, no nothing. And you can see in there that there is no turbo in there. That is the floor and my needle nose pliers back there. So we ended up taking out that turbo to get to that fix, which was a pain in the butt. But I'll show you the problem we ran into with our seal there. So basically what we ran into was we weren't getting a good seal right here because of the plate that goes on here. So what happened was the coolant fitting was not seated into this boss here. So that was our main issue. So we ended up having to do a little bit of work so that we had a good tight fit here and let that cooler or plate go tight up against this to seal this gasket off, which in turn pulled up the coolant fitting that went up in here. So the tube that goes up in here wasn't being held in because we couldn't get our retainer to pull that tube up in there. So our whole problem was the fact that that was not seated. Now I didn't check that whenever I was putting this all together, because I put it all together, figured we didn't have to do anything, tightened all the bolts up, bolts tightened up, everything seemed to be okay, and we went on our merry way. But because I screwed up and didn't quadruple check this, I had to do it over again. But it's fixed now. We're holding coolant pressure still, so that's a plus, and we are going to go ahead and reassemble this van. So it looks like we're still holding pressure here. Yep, still sitting right on that number 5. So this has not blown any pressure off, which is great. That's what we want to see. We've been holding pressure for a couple minutes now. And I'm going to let this hold pressure for probably another 5 to 10 minutes just to make sure, unless it blows one of our plugs out that's in the hoses. So we'll go until one of those things happens first. Anyway, we got to go ahead, put this thing back together. Getting a turbo in and out of this thing is a pain in the butt, so we may end up pushing it back outside and picking the body up to put the turbo back on, because it just sucks, because it needed like this much more room above the turbo to get it out easily, and it's like just it's not there. So we haven't even squished the body mounts down yet, so you know it's going to go even closer. So tons of fun there. But anyway, so I wanted to show you this video to show you the vacuum tester and how you can use it to pull vacuum and then put coolant in, but then also wanted to show you about testing your cooling system. Now, I know that we're working on a 6-liter with you know, this E-Series van here. However, this system will apply to anything. So if you have a fresh build, a rebuild, if you even just did a water pump, or a radiator, always check your cooling system before you start to put coolant in, because probably 50% of the time there's something that has happened. Not necessarily something that I did wrong or you did wrong, but just stupid stuff that was easily overlooked, like the hose clamp or that stupid fitting on the bottom of the intake there. Stuff that, it seems okay. It should be okay, but in reality it isn't. Like, hey, we replaced all this stuff, but that doesn't mean that it's right. So going through, checking your cooling system will save you a lot of headache, save you a little bit of money because you're not going to be wasting coolant, and then save you from making a mess everywhere when you find out that you do actually have a coolant leak. So it just so happens that we had a coolant leak on this van. That was not planned. I was hoping that that wasn't going to be the case, and it ended up being in one of the worst spots possible. So that's usually how things go. So very important, check your cooling system. Hopefully this will help you guys out in deciding on whether or not to check your cooling system before you start to actually put it back together and fill it up. So this will give you the idea. It's like, hey, take the 5 minutes and check it, because it could save you hours later on down the road. So hopefully this will help you guys out in working on your vehicle, your E-Series, your F-Series, your 7.3, your 6-liter, whatever. It's got a cooling system. Check it before you put it all together, because it can save you time and money. So thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate the views. I appreciate you reaching out and commenting. So please keep them coming, and we're going to try to keep these videos coming for you. So once again, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.